Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Awesome Wholesaler Experience Podcast, where we look into the many facets of the job, the career, and the lifestyle of investment and insurance product wholesaling. I'm your host, the creator of the Awesome Wholesaler Experience, and yours truly, Awesome Mike. Today's guest is the co-founder and CEO of Pareto Systems, best-selling author of the Advisor Playbook and Breakthrough Business Development. He is also the contributor of 50 awesome articles on LinkedIn. And he is the hit star of dozens, well, actually 154 and counting terrific videos on YouTube. And these definitely offer timely, content-rich, and entertaining videos from around the world. And he is now a repeat guest on the Awesome Wholesaler Experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me and join me in welcoming back to the show, Mr. Duncan MacPherson. Hey, Duncan, how are you? Thanks for being on the show again.
I'm great, Mike, and thanks very much. I appreciate that enthusiastic introduction, and I appreciate you having me back. And I often say, it says a lot when someone like you would have me back. Maybe it says you'll give me one more chance to get it right. I don't know, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, in all sincerity, you've been an icon in the industry for quite a while, let's just say. And to have you on the first time was great. And we didn't get you on the audio. Or we did get you on the audio only, not the video. So it was really cool to have a chance to get you on the video. Thanks a lot for dressing up and for getting all spiffy for us. Appreciate that. And a little shout out to Andrew there in the background, because you are in trouble, sir. But anyways, hope you guys are doing well. I have a quick question though before we get too far into it, Duncan. I was doing some research, and I'm a big fan of yours, but I was actually digging in with a different eye, and I saw that you are into this book called Extreme Ownership. And Extreme Ownership was written by one of my brothers. At least I'd call him one of them, or two of my brothers, Leaf Babin, and of course, big man Jocko. So my question for you, Duncan, is: are you ready to begin your jiu-jitsu journey?
I'm pretty open and embracing for everything, but I have to tell you, that book, as a parent, let alone as a business owner, that book is so incredibly powerful and yet simple. And it's something that we all have control over, to totally eliminate any blame or any excuses. It's liberating just to take ownership and complete responsibility for our outcomes. So I can't recommend that book enough. I can't recommend it enough for even, you think about a wholesaler who's trying to strengthen a relationship with his or her clients, and those clients have kids. That cascading value add is immense. And I do appreciate the fact that you have an affinity based on your past of service, because the credibility that comes from that world is immense. So I appreciate you starting there.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm actually a blue belt, and I'm going to class tonight, by the way, in jiu-jitsu.
Oh.
So it's something that literally, seriously, it's something that you can actually, I recommend that you and Andrew go to a class. Just Google BJJ, and Kelowna's probably has one. Definitely down in California, when you're there, they do. I travel quite a bit as a wholesaler, and now I'm doing consulting for wholesalers. So it literally, when I'm in Chicago, I go to Redzovich Jiu-Jitsu. When I'm in Minneapolis, I go to M Theory, which is in St. Louis Park. When I'm in Cleveland, I train with the former heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic at Strong Style. And I've made a lot of friends and connections through jiu-jitsu. It is literally a superpower, not only for kids, but also for people, for humans, I guess, adults, I'm trying to say. Meaning that you know the technical way to defend yourself. And here's the catch: without having to hurt the other person.
Yeah.
That's the catch, without having to hurt the other person. And so that book is terrific. He has a kids book series too. Jocko does. which is just terrific. It makes a great gift for for any kid. He has a couple of them actually, and they're fruitful and they're thoughtful, and they're pretty cool. So I appreciate you that. I encourage you to do that. In fact, I will be your partner, my friend, if you want to go do some jujitsu somewhere, and that way you won't feel like you're the odd guy out or what have you, and it'll be a lot of fun, I promise you. But I would encourage you to
go easy on me.
Yeah, no, it's all, it's like I tell people, it's kind of like the buffet line. Some days I go to class and I'm just, I'm easy going. Maybe I had a long night, just want to get in, get my workout in, learn a couple of things. Other days you go in there with a little chip on your shoulder. And whenever you go to jujitsu class, you're going to get all you can eat. There's going to be somebody there that will give you all you can eat on the mats. So it's a wonderful thing.
Well, the one thing I found, because both of my kids are pretty deep into, it's a hybrid of self-defense, but knowing how to defend yourself, but also having a mindset of not going out and looking for trouble by virtue of the fact that you have so much immense respect for humanity, and also humility, knowing that there's always going to be somebody else that could take you down. But it's funny, my oldest son, when he graduated from high school, the tradition was they go to a bonfire, and it was way out remote from here in the middle of nowhere. And so you've got hundreds of these grade 12 kids, and of course there was some drinking and things, and somebody bumped into my son from behind, and then kind of, I think, was maybe tipped over a little bit, and then pushed him. And he turned around and squared into a pose. It was just hardwired. And it was just innate now. That just the look that he projected of preparedness, it shut the whole thing down. It was sobering to the guy, because he realized, and nothing was exchanged beyond that. But when you're so well prepared, I guess the metaphor is, it projects a sense of confidence and ability that it exudes and creates respect.
You are a consummate professional. I know where you were trying to go there. You're talking about having your written agenda. We're going to get to all that good stuff in a minute, I promise you. But let's start from the beginning. I'm not going to get into too much of where you're from, where you grew up, and all that. If you're listening or you're watching this episode and you want to know more about Duncan's high school times and his how he came up in the business, go to episode 16. He was the guest on episode 16 of the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, for as long as Google Play's around. And you can check out, his little bit more of his backstory in detail. But I'll give you the quick of it. The Templeton Wholesalers, they put you on the board, according to your claim. But I want to know, how did you get so deeply entrenched or deeply hooked into this Pareto Principle, Duncan?
Well, great question. And I had been studying even long before I got into this sector specifically. I had been studying universal laws and principles that affect us all in life and in business. And of course, like law of attraction, law of cause and effect, law of environment, and on it goes. I came across the Pareto Principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, and that really fascinated me. I mean, Vilfredo Pareto, back in the 1800s, I mean, he identified 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. He even applied it to agriculture and identified that 80% of the peas come from 20% of the pods.
Oh, wow.
And that actually contributes. I live in the Okanagan in Canada here. This is wine country. It's actually been regarded as one of the top destinations in the world for wine tourism. And so, of course, pruning is an important element to agriculture, especially when there's a fine quality outcome. And that's a metaphor in life as well, is that, when it comes to relationships, the goal isn't always to see how big you can get, it's how small you can stay to really nurture those relationships. And sometimes we need to prune to make sure that the really strong can flourish.
Yeah, I agree, and try to embrace that myself. Um, you know, I went back and looked, and I figured that you've got a pretty strong presence on LinkedIn, and you really use that tool quite a bit. And that's not that new of a tool, frankly. And social media also is not that new. So I go back and I look at your YouTube channel, and I see that you've been doing your YouTube channel. I don't know if this will be news to you, but since November of 2011. I mean, you must have like been one of the guys in the mix, because that's your first time that your post showed up there. Is that not correct?
I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. And I don't really pay a lot of attention to YouTube specifically. It's a great platform. And incidentally, I love video because it's a scalable way to distribute messaging. It's very, very efficient. You got to respect some parameters in terms of how you structure the video. But LinkedIn, I had a kind of a eureka moment. I guess this would have been 4 years ago. I always thought of social networking as social not working, because I kind of look at it as like spray and pray. But when I learned about this concept known as the relationship cycle and how the funnel and the pipeline works to convert intent to consent, I realized that there's a stage of readiness. And if you can get a growing community of people and eyeballs on your content, it's moving them through the relationship cycle. And we've seen it happen. But you have to be incredibly patient. You have to be very diligent and very respectful, because the moment you cross the line in videos and make them shamelessly about promoting you, your viewership goes down dramatically. So we subscribe to content marketing. LinkedIn has been a very good platform for us, and it continues to grow. And our reach is quite actually impressive now. But yeah, the YouTube side is more behind the scenes as a platform. But I wasn't aware that we were posting videos as far back as then.
Yeah, I was shocked, and maybe it's a typo, but you have 154 of those videos. So I haven't slept in 2 days as I've watched each one of them. No, all kidding aside, though, I've watched probably all of them and enjoy them, and it's neat to see your evolution. Quickly, do you think that financial advisors and even wholesalers should embrace LinkedIn or embrace social media, or is it too close to the fire with the regulatory responsibilities that they have to abide by?
No, I think the regulatory is actually playing a good role there, and it really governs to ensure that it is as client-centered as possible. The first thing I'll ask anybody who's thinking about embracing this, you're not too late, by the way. There's a lot of runway left. But really detach yourself from an expectation of an outcome. If you think of the law of cause and effect, good activity will create productivity, but it takes time. So if you just take the expectation of productivity off the table, just keep your head down and do the work, it will come together. And it's funny, we were talking just before this, you and I, about our spouses and things like that. And my wife, she's got a nickname for me. She calls me the smartest kid in summer school. But her theme is, she says, I'm always right eventually. It just sometimes takes a while.
That's great.
And if you take that mindset into LinkedIn and into the scalable distribution of your value, you'll be right eventually.
Words of wisdom, appreciate them. Last thing I'll touch on with that is I believe in that. and the principle that it's not our clients, whether they're individual investors or financial advisors, it's not their responsibility to think of us when they're ready to do business. It's our responsibility to be right there, to
Yeah.
be right there when they're ready to do business. And by using the social media, you've done that. You're right there whenever anybody needs something. You're giving them nourishment daily, almost, if not multiple times a day, and it's terrific. Can we talk about your current business focus? And as I'm looking into what you're putting your hand to, Pareto Systems is just phenomenal. So congratulations on its evolution, and I really feel like it's hitting on all cylinders. And we're going to go through a few different parts of it. But I want to kind of lead off after showing my gratitude and appreciation for it. I want to lead off with this thing called the Pareto Academy. Pareto Academy is actionable and sequential virtual coaching. Duncan, what are you doing with Pareto Academy?
Well, thanks, by the way. But I want to go back for a second. You said something that was actually quite profound. And I don't mean to sound surprised. I mean, you are a guy.
Oh, nice.
But for you to say that it's not the client's responsibility or a prospective client's responsibility or a strategic partner's responsibility to be aware of us, that's a pretty interesting perspective. And I think when you tie that in with just understanding someone's natural stage of readiness and just being patient and respectful of that, I think that is in many ways going to activate the law of attraction. Because a lot of people out there, they want to move the needle, right? They're the classic sort of hunter-gatherer. I eat what I kill, I'm coin-operated, and I'm pressing for a transaction, a win, right? I think when you just have a spiritual sort of outlook and say, I'm just going to put myself out there and see where it lands, I think there's a really good energy that comes with that. So kudos. That's a neat perspective.
Well, thanks for saying that. And it kind of echoes a little bit of what you talk about when you say that your relationship with a investor, like a financial advisor relationship with an investor, is not to give them a financial plan. It's to actually do financial planning. And it's not a one-time transaction. It's a lifelong relationship that you're building. In order to build a lifelong relationship, you have to be patient. So I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I can tell that you are paying attention, because that is part of the lifeblood of what we talk about, is that we don't, so to your point, a financial advisor, a financial wholesaler, we have to look at the relationship of, I'm not asking you to buy something. I'm asking you to buy into something. I want you to buy into a relationship with me. I want you to buy into a relationship with my practice and the client experience it creates. And I want you to buy into my process. And the powerful thing about positioning your values being driven by a process is that you're future pacing, so that a client will never get to a point where they feel they can outgrow you. They grow into the process. And that mindset of stewardship is very, very attractive in terms of professional contrast. Again, great distinction.
Yeah, and I appreciate you putting out there, and thanks for acknowledging it. So you have the Pareto Academy, which is your online and sequential virtual coaching. We're going to go skip right by that to my favorite thing you have on there, which are your mastermind sessions. I'm going to read from the site. Offsite at resorts to work on their business, not in their business. And I'll quote you. A small group of advisors, together with Duncan MacPherson, will dive deeply into issues facing financial professionals today. These sessions are not a pep talk or a group hug. They are not a lecturing data dump, but rather a productive, actionable conversation with a clear path for implementation. Duncan, can you shed some light into these mastermind sessions that you're hosting?
Well, first of all, the premise of working on the business, and you probably know this, I got that from Michael Gerber, who wrote the E-Myth, the entrepreneurial myth, right? Now, a lot of people hear the word entrepreneur and they think it's a French word for somebody who works at home in their underwear. which would make for a weird casual Friday if you think about it. But and you're looking at me probably laughing based on the way I'm dressed today. But in the E-Myth, he talked about the difference between having a strong technical ability and transacting just based on that technical ability. So, you know, the myth is just being good at your core competency is just a minimum requirement. That's just the beginning. That's not enough. The myth is that's enough. It's not enough. It's just a beginning because of commoditization. So the mindset of working on the business is that now you're building something. You're building enterprise value and you're building IP. So I'll dovetail these. So you think of Pareto Academy, what my team has been working on is taking all of our qualities and skills and intentions and professionalizing them into an intellectual property that's proprietary. You think about a financial plan, that's commoditized. It's important, but it's transactional. Financial planning, that's fluid and dynamic. I want everybody listening in to be thinking of where is your intellectual property? What is your IP that adds intrinsic value? Now, here's what's interesting. To complete the loop there on the mastermind, the most profound part of the mastermind is not anything I say as I facilitate these sessions, it's the peer sharing. Because you think about someone's aspiration, they get to sit across from somebody who's maybe a little further down the track, and it demystifies that aspiration. Let's say I'm an advisor and I manage $500 million and I'm talking to a guy who manages $1 billion. I can start to think of myself as a $1 billion advisor who currently manages 500. And I can see right in front of me how someone conducts himself or herself who's achieved that goal that I want to attain myself. So the peer sharing and the openness about what it means to create IP, what it means to shift from a mindset of a book of business to an actual business, that's invaluable. And I will tell you, straight up, I get as much out of those conversations as anybody, because it helps me elevate from a theoretical construct and talk in real time about reality of what separates the best from the rest. And, I often joke because I get, people like you who are respectful, they give me credit and they say, hey, you've got so many good ideas. You're so creative. Hey, for me, creativity is my ability to conceal my sources. Okay. So Mike, I've got a rule of 3. If you give me a good idea, the first time I talk about it, I'll give you credit. I'll say, it's like Mike says. The second time, it's like someone said. The third time, it's like I've always said. It just becomes mine. So that's the beauty of having some mileage in the industry and being around people who are really effective. It's this composite of best practices and a mindset and a philosophy of how to attract rather than chase. But all of that is what is brought out in those mastermind sessions.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm sure that Napoleon Hill himself would be very proud of you in your efforts of hosting that. Maybe even Henry Ford and his wife too, if you know what I'm talking about there.
Oh, of course. Well, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. There's something profound in that book, because he said in that book that thoughts are things. Okay, so we are what we think about most of the time. So you think about the self-fulfilling, the law of attraction, that's all there. But then apply that to the industry. For a knowledge for profit professional who thinks for a living, we want to turn their thoughts into a thing, to take it from abstract to conceptual and from commoditized to proprietary. So case in point, you think about IP, think about this. You ask most financial professionals for their value proposition. They'll say, well, I'm a financial advisor and I help my clients achieve their financial goals. So what's the difference between that and then saying, I'm part of a wealth advisory team And we've developed and refined a process that helps our clients achieve their financial goals. Same messenger, but the distinction in the message, I took it from I'm a good guy with good intentions to I'm a good guy with good intentions. Oh, and by the way, we don't wing it. We've got a process in place, puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. That's a thing. I'm taking my thoughts. Now it's a thing. It's an intellectual property. It's like a handle to grab onto. That's what it looks like for someone to buy into something. I'm buying into the process. You think about professional contrast. My current advisor doesn't have a process. He just calls me with ideas. Professional contrast lives right there, just to put it all into a concept.
Well, I love it. You're skipping ahead in the program, which you're totally allowed to do because it's your program. That's your defined process. And I want to talk about that in great detail. Let's just put a button or finish the button on the Pareto Systems. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners, viewers, www.paretosystems.com is where you can find the Pareto Academy mastermind sessions, the new Pareto Systems app for when you're on the go and you need a little Duncan MacPherson from the field. And they also have Pareto Systems Podium Productions, where you can find Pareto certified speakers for hire. One of my favorite things that you've done, and you've done it since we last spoken, Duncan, is you launched the Blue Square Method. And this Blue Square Method is very neat. They have this hieroglyphic-looking Egyptian mixed with, what's the guy, Dante? It's a really cool little overlay. And it's not Dante. Who was the guy? What's the movie that Tom Hanks played in? What's it called? The big scientist. What's his name? It's not Dante. It's
You got me, man.
Andy, who is it? What is it called?
I'm not knowing.
Oh, no, you know what it is. It's like the guy that created all the, like wrote in all the scrolls, and he could see, not Nostradamus, but.
The Dan Brown's books.
Exactly. And anyways, we'll think of it in here in a few minutes, but you know, Duncan and his team, they layer these 4 quadrants and they intersect them so that you come up with a great solution. First one is that you do what you love. Second one is you have a world-class process. Third one is you create advocates. And the fourth one is you fully monetize your process. And all of this does is really results in one thing, and that's personal fulfillment, gratitude, balance, and purpose. Kudos, congrats on the Blue Square Method. I could not be more proud of you for doing that. And again, if you're listening or viewing this, you can find all that at www.paretosystems.com. Let's skip forward, though. Let's go to this defined process. And this is what I was going to quote you, Duncan. You kind of paraphrase for me, but you say that a typical response is, when somebody asks you, what do? You say, well, I help my clients manage their assets and risk. I mean, snooze, boring. Yeah, don't tell anybody because you're going to corner the market. No. But there's that versus I've developed and refined a process that enables me to manage my clients' assets and risk. The defined process that you're talking about, can a wholesaler do this?
So let's tie all this together, okay? Because you've opened up and you covered a lot of ground there. So I'll put it into a package. First of all, and I do have to acknowledge, so the Blue Square Method, that's a book that I'm working on with Chris Jepson, who you might know from First Trust. And it's a follow-up to the Advisor Playbook. The Blue Square Method, I'll tell you, if I'm the only person who reads that book, it'll be worthwhile because of what it brought out in me. The Blue Square coaching process, obviously we're building that bridge as we cross it, but it's so incredibly collaborative with our clients. But the origins of the Blue Square, that's like true north, that's the bullseye. It actually stems from what is called Ikigai. So if you think of the Japanese word Kaizen, Kaizen effectively means Kai is change, Zen is good. So change is good. And I'm not sure if you've read this recently, but there's this new premise. It's the new illiterate. The new illiterate is someone who won't change. They won't unlearn. Instead of having the past serve the future, they're set in their ways, right? So the blue square and this ikigai, it's basically a self-assessment and ensuring that we are incredibly happy with what we have while we aspire to what we want, but making qualitative and quantitative improvement. So, you know, if you think about that as a mindset, and, oh, and by the way, if you ever read Jim Collins' Good to Great,
Sure.
a lot of that is rooted right in there. Like, just, you know, what am I good at? What do I love? What does the world need? And how can I monetize fully? Those are great questions just to sort of ask ourselves every now and again to make sure we're on the right track. I mean, I don't know about you. I know your history a little bit. But one of the most powerful self-assessment questions is, based on what I know now, if I could go back in time 25 years, would I have done the same thing? Would I have gotten onto the same track and followed the same path? Obviously, we make changes and ideally bump up against less friction and adversity, but it really speaks to purpose. And that's a huge foundation around productivity. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as it relates to the origins of the blue square, where it sort of comes from. But your point about a wholesaler having a process. The first thing is the mindset of the long-term relationship, and it's not transactional. We're not pumping up this leaky tire asking advisors to buy something from us sporadically, haphazardly, occasionally. We want to build a long-term relationship where I'm indispensable to the advisor as the wholesaler. So how do we do that? Well, part of the process is not just the solutions you represent. That's your technical ability. It's the advisor experience, what it means to be your client. So the performance of the solutions you provide, well, I mean, it's got to be good. But professional contrast is in what it means to be your client and the value add, bringing value that they actually value. That's part of your process. That's part of the elite wholesaler of the future's process, is a very methodical, defined approach to value added that someone will value. And we can get more into that, but the net answer to your question is absolutely. A wholesaler can have a proprietary process that advisors can buy into.
You know, you mentioned an introductory kit, and I'll quote you. Your prospect gets to hold something in their hands and get to know you a bit before they've even met you. Then I'll put a little pro tip in there. Send it via 2-day courier to elevate its importance and increase the value the person places on the meeting. You further validate your professionalism by providing a printed agenda and outlining your defined process in the meeting. I've done a version of this, and it really sets me apart when I was wholesaling, because I just seem like I'm more than a professional visitor. I'm actually a professional. What do you think about an introductory kit for wholesalers?
Wow, you think about the CSA, right? The client service associate, or anybody on the team who's ultimately there to elevate the advisor's client experience, but also to liberate the advisor from noise. And a lot of people think of a wholesaler as noise, interchangeable, commoditized. So they're not, the wholesaler's not just dealing with the advisor, they're dealing with the team. The introductory team the introductory kit projects something to the team that says, okay, I am elevated. And I mean, hey, if you're going to tell the world you have a process, it helps actually have one. So the introductory kit is a tangible form, something, like you said, you can hold in your hands that says this is part of my process. Now, here's the interesting thing. Existing advisor relationships that you're trying to create advocacy for, someone who sits in a branch, or somebody who hangs around with other advisors. When they understand you have a process, they understand how it would reflect on them to introduce a friend to you, and they start socializing your values, saying, oh yeah, I've met a lot of wholesalers. This wholesaler's got a process, elevated professionalism. You know, if you want to meet with them, the first thing they do is they have an initial conversation, and then they send their introductory kit. Every time they show up, they've got an agenda, very efficient. They always respect my time. Never seen anything like it. You see, now I'm an advocate socializing your value to a peer. The peer now has anticipation for the meeting, as opposed to just viewing it as another interaction with a wholesaler. So absolutely, it's got to be part of the process.
You know, two things on that. I'm going to reach over here on my desk just to show you how ad lib this is. And I have one left, and this is the back end of my process. And this is a postcard. So I was down at a conference last week, and I send a handwritten postcard as a part of my process. Now, you talk about scalability and actually trying to be small. You can't send out very many of those. They are very impactful when someone does receive them. Maybe even think about the last time that I received anything, that didn't have a return envelope to include the check that I probably owed somebody. It's been a while. So I embrace this defined process. I encourage all the listeners to do it. Tying into the concept of this process, you said in one of your articles, the smartest don't work the hardest. The smartest don't work the hardest. That's a title of one of your articles. And when I first read it, when I first saw it, I said, okay, we're going to go around on this one because I don't agree with this. I believe that hard work is the cornerstone to success. I'm sure that you would agree. However, I'm going to read a couple quotes from you. You said this, and I quote, I've seen it time and time again. Being more productive doesn't mean that you have to work harder or put in longer hours. You just have to be strict and economical with your time. And our friend Jocko would talk about discipline with your time becoming that freedom. Can you address working harder versus working smarter?
Yeah, so first of all, I would never trivialize hard work. But again, it's kind of a minimum requirement. So I guess what I'm saying is, like when we coach somebody, we're not saying to them, look, you're going to have to start working harder. You already probably do work hard. But Jim Rohn, legendary personal and professional development guru, he would say, you can't mistake movement for achievement. Hemingway would say, you can't mistake motion for action. I've seen a lot of people work hard and plateau. And what's interesting, not long ago, I was in Pebble Beach at a conference, and Justin Rose, the #1 golfer in the world, spoke before me. And he talked about the symmetry of golf as a metaphor in life. And it's interesting. He said, self-awareness, if you want to improve, you don't find one thing to improve on by 10%. You find 10 little things to improve on by 1%. And the multipliers there are huge. But you get to a point where there's this, you talk about incrementalism, there's an inflection point where your activity and your efforts and your hard work, they tip over. You think about in life, the proverbial 25-year overnight success story. Seems like it came out of nowhere, but there's so much that went into that. You know, you fly a lot. The airplane takes off. It's full throttle and gets up to an altitude where there's less friction, and it doesn't feel like it's expending as much energy because it's got that inertia. So again, never trivialize hard work, but looking for efficiencies, looking to refine and optimize what you do, you can expend less effort.
Thanks for clarifying that. So what you're saying is you do have to still get after it, but just don't think you can run around in first gear all the time. You have to mature. You know, you have a couple of interesting articles, and I really enjoy them. If you haven't seen Duncan's articles, he's on LinkedIn, Duncan MacPherson, just like it sounds, and he's linked to me. So if you can't try, you can triangulate. He's got 50 of them, 50. That's a lot of a book of a body of work, let's say. And one of my favorite ones is what you called defining moments. Defining moments to keep going, essentially, with your calls and with your outreach, and to do these two things, which we've kind of touched on a bit here, but to be interesting and patient. To be interesting and patient, and don't stop. Don't give up until they ask you to. So, Duncan, could you give us some examples of how a wholesaler, or even a financial advisor, can be interesting and patient?
I think the patient part is just, again, coming out of the detaching from an expectation of an outcome and just having faith in the work, in the effort, in the activity. I would clarify, yes, you want to be interesting, but you also want to be interested in the individual and have a process for that. You know, I know you're well aware of our acronym FORM. You know, when a wholesaler is meeting with an advisor for 45 minutes, they're probably talking for 15 minutes about products, pricing, and performance, and all things money. But in life, money is a means to an end, to our family, our occupation, our recreational goals and aspirations. So we want to be interesting regarding the money and interested in their family, occupation, recreational aspirations. And there are moments of truth that can define a relationship. You know, a breakthrough, a milestone. One of our coaches talks about a story about an advisor of hers whose kid got accepted to a great college. And this is a very meaningful client. So our coach went on to the website of the college and ordered the advisor a sweatshirt for the dad, right? So it would be the college name, dad, and sent it to the advisor. And I'm not saying get in the gift-giving business, but that was a moment of truth that they were very proud of, and it was a big milestone for the family. Didn't cost a lot of money, but the impact was massive. The shelf life was massive. So there's these opportunities as the relationship unfolds to just basically says, hey, I'm paying attention. And not a lot of people do that. So it stands out by virtue of the fact that a lot of people just let that go.
You know, that's I love the idea. And I think that if you can be patient and you can have a defined process, you're not in first gear scrambling for what are you going to say next? What are you going to sell next? What's the latest, the latest idea that you just heard of that you're trying to get a quick, some reason to meet with this, with your client or with your advisor. It lets you to actually look for those defining moments and maybe even create them.
Well, you think about this, okay? So wholesalers got a really great relationship with a team. The team is growing. The team decides that they're going to move from a leased premise to they're going to buy a building and move into that building. So the wholesaler goes and takes a picture of the building and then uploads that picture into an app that turns the picture into a work of art. So now it looks like a painting of the building. And the wholesaler shows up with that picture framed as the welcome gift for the open house. You know, I'm not saying lunch is a bad idea, bringing in lunch for the team, but that gets consumed and it's gone. That little touch has got impact and shelf life. I'm going above and beyond, right? It's, again, professional contrast, and it's part of our process. We pay tribute to your accomplishments. That's part of our process. You know?
Yeah, I love it. One of my favorite things that I've ever done as a wholesaler is I had an advisor that became a pilot. And, you start off flying little crop dusters and whatnot. And, but it was a big deal for him. And I just went online and got him a pair of aviator goggles, like old school, Red Baron, Snoopy kind of things, and sent them to him. And I mean, he still talks about those goggles, and that was 18 years ago. And when I go to his office, they're right there. He's got a picture. He's got the shirt tail. I guess they cut the shirt tail off of you when you get your license, when your pilot's license.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, something like, and then he got the goggles hanging on the frame there. So I encourage.
That's interesting. Okay, so sorry to jump in there, but if you think about technology and if you embrace the fact that the more technology creeps into our lives, the more the human touch matters. Look at the commoditization of the financial services space. Advisor client, wholesaler advisor. I mean, commoditization means cut out middlemen, right? Just find efficiencies. And a lot of that's driven by technology, the digital. But the one thing that the AI will never have is the EI, the emotional intelligence, the relationship management. So it's not just managing money, we're managing people. And this just tends to stand out more. The technology is a minimum requirement. It's a given you got that. It's this over here, the behavior, the relationship, the coaching, the advice, that's all process driven. That's how you unlock another level, and we see that all the time.
Yeah, you mentioned the client experience, and to quote one of our guests, Dennis Mosley Williams is also one of your countrymen. He's a Canadian, and he basically said that customer service is about making things faster and cheaper, basically commoditizing them, and but creating an experience is that at the end of the day, or at the end of the meeting, that client, that advisor feels like that was time well spent. And that's what I try to do, in every one of my interactions now, not just those meetings, but that's the experience that you're talking about. And I don't think you can commoditize that.
Well, I totally agree. And I know Dennis, and he's got a very unique ability in terms of his approach. It's very true. And it's interesting. A long time ago, I came across a guy by the name of Harry Beckwith. And he wrote a book called Selling the Invisible. So it was for the fee-for-service professional, the service provider. So it's not a transaction of a specific tangible good. It's more of this sort of invisible thing, especially something that's got some delayed gratification in terms of its result. And in the book, he talks about the importance of decommoditizing, because you're not just focusing on the transaction, you're focusing on the client experience, what it means. So it's not promissory of performance, it's what it means to be your client, and having them understand all of the things you do, not just this one thing. This is what propels someone to advocacy and loyalty and competitor proofing the relationship. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I love that book too, by the way. It was one of the first books that I when I started reading back in the day. And it's a little guy, so you get fooled. Oh, it's a little book, but my goodness, I mean, you just get sucked into it, and it's so the content is so rich that I really just really appreciate that book. So thanks for mentioning it again. Speaking of your process, speaking of your relationship, the experience that someone has with you and your team, one of the articles you wrote was titled, "It's Not the Wind, It's the Set of the Sails." And you had a nice picture of your boat on there, Duncan. So kudos on the boat. I'd love to go for a ride on that someday with you. But essentially, to quote you, you said, "The winds of opportunity blow the same for all of us. The difference that separates the best from the rest is how they set their sails." I love that. That's going to be one that I'm going to put on paper and put up in front of my face so I can remember that. But to break it open, you have this goal achievement process that you call the W5. The W5. And it starts off with, what are you grateful for? Where do you see yourself in the future? When do you hope to accomplish these goals? Why is this so important to you? And who will I need to be in order to achieve this? And then one of my favorite quotes from you: "After all is said and done, more is often said than done." And you probably, borrowed that from somebody. You're not quite that old to be creating these profound things, but one of the last ones is that, ultimately it comes down to how will you accomplish these goals? And there's a thing called the illusion of skill. That really hit me hard. This illusion of skill. As a wholesaler that's had some success, I think I might have developed an illusion of skill. Can you address your W5? Can you address the illusion of skill concept?
Well, first of all, as I hear you talk about this, I'm saying to myself, wow, this is really good stuff. But yeah, first of all, the concept of "it's not the wind, it's the set of the sail," that's again coming right from Jim Rohn. And I think about a financial professional, and I think about all the external dependencies and the delayed gratification involved in validating that you were right. It's incredible. And what's important for the client to understand is we're not at the mercy of external dependencies. We've got risk management, and we've got a mindset where we're going to pay close attention to things out of our control, but we're really going to focus on what is in our control. And the set of the sail, the rudder, that's in our control. So we can harness the winds and be prepared for a storm. That's strategic planning. That's just a metaphor on business and life, but that's where its origins come from. W5, so I come back to Justin Rose. At that meeting where he was talking, he said, essentially, goals are important, but goals themselves are useless without a process for accomplishing them. So part of the process is getting our goals and our aspirations out of our heads and put on paper. Because now they're real. We've got this sort of premise, we say, from vapor to paper. So vapor, it's this artificial world, this virtual world. Paper is something tangible I can hold in my hands. So W5 is just evolved from many interactions with our clients where we say to them, like, what does nirvana look like for you in the next 5 to 10 years if it all falls out of the sky into your lap? And I found that many people would be talking about the future. But I think one of the most powerful fuels for ambition is immense gratitude and contentment for what we have. So if you think of W5 as goal setting, that first question, what am I grateful for already? I think 90% of the world would kill for our worst day. So let's not take that for granted. And then, so that's investing the past into the future. Where do I see myself? Creating that wish list, getting it out of our heads. It's self-fulfilling, to document it. When do I hope to accomplish these goals? Why are they so important to me? Again, Jim Rohn said, when the why is clear, the how takes care of itself. The process is important, but the purpose is really motivating. And then back to extreme ownership. Who do I need to become to make all this a reality? You know, am I locked in the status quo, or am I prepared to study and do the work and collaborate? Who do I need to collaborate with? I find W5 to be a very good diagnostic self-assessment for goal setting. And then the last thing, your comment about after all is said and done, more is often said than done. I know that sounds like a bumper sticker or a fridge magnet, but the one immutable law that is universal is the law of diminishing intent. So we have an intention to achieve a goal. And we want to turn intent into an outcome through an implementation. So if you think about a 3-circle Venn diagram, the first circle is where we are. The third circle is where we want to be. That middle circle, that's no man's land. That's like this interlude in between who we are and who we want to become. And a lot of things get derailed there. Our intent diminishes, we get distracted, we lose our focus, our motivation. Goals become the beacon. The activity and the work is in between, is like the bridge to get us there. And back to the blue square, and it's rooted in gratitude and purpose and fulfillment. You know, these things make it meaningful.
That's amazing. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Jim Rohn that he is talking to is not Jim Rome. Rome is burning. It is Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. One of my favorite motivational guys. Rest in peace. He's gone on to this next chapter. He's all over the place as well. Law of Attraction is his YouTube channel. Law of Attraction Coaching or something like this. It's terrific stuff, Duncan. I have a question though. When I hear the word gratitude, it leads me to think that would breed complacency. Be glad for what you have. Be grateful for what you have. And doesn't that kind of like make me think like, okay, I don't have to try so hard. I should be grateful for what I have, to where, you know, you listen to any hip hop song and it's usually rooted in this angry and voracious determination to break out or to prove something that really has very little gratitude. In fact, quite the opposite.
Well, I never thought about it in those terms, but I think there's any sort of spiritual connection to self-actualization, we've got to pay tribute. I mean, not taking anything for granted. I mean, I was saying to my kid, you know, what's the one thing you can go the least amount of time without? Well, it's air. How many times do you breathe a day? 22,000 times. You don't give it a second thought. It just happens. Well, you know, water. I mean, all those things that we just, they're just by our birthright, our good fortune, and all the different people that insulate that. I mean, I think it's honoring to pay tribute to that, but not getting locked in this concept of contentment, pursuit of happiness, free will. You know, if we can become something, we are responsible to do that. So I think the two of them together, it's like a yin yang dynamic that work off of each other. And, you know, in life, you need the dark to appreciate the light. You need the cold to appreciate the warm. You need some adversity to appreciate the breakthrough. I guess that's just balance right there is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, you know, I think that this whole gratitude concept is popular today. And I think everything ebbs and flows. Mike Scortino, as you probably know him, he wrote the book Gratitude Marketing. And it's interesting because you're talking about some metaphysical things. You're talking about some, some things that are based on faith more than just binary, a closing skeleton. They say this, you say these three things, or then you say this, they're going to say one of these three things, you can counter with these. That's kind of binary, as opposed to planting seeds, being grateful, having a positive, nurturing attitude about your business and your relationships. Which I also believe, though, that you do have to complement that, as you're saying, with this synergistic hunger and this desire, something that's going to get you out of bed, even though you are sleeping in a heavenly bed at the Westin, as you mentioned, is your favorite. Mine too, by the way. I'd love to be the heavenly wholesaler. No, I'm not going to wait on that one. But I appreciate you saying that. Your W-5 is a process. It does walk you through there, which I think just gets you so much further than just talking about it. You probably know The Rock. Remember The Rock, right? Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
He played football up in Calgary for a while for the Stampeders. Just fun fact.
Yeah, he's a colorful individual. When he was a wrestler, he had this famous saying, and no, it's not, do you smell what The Rock is cooking? Not that one. But he had this saying, don't talk about it, be about it. And that's kind of what you're getting at there. A lot more is said than done when all is said and done. Don't talk about it.
I'm not trying to one-up you on the quote factory here, but the spiritual side, the enlightenment side, is just as important as the tangible and the productivity. And one of my favorite quotes of all time, C.S. Lewis, he said, you don't have a soul. You are a soul. You have a body. And you think about however long we're going to be here. It's all a gift, right? But I'd love to think that it doesn't end with the body. So
that was from Mere Christianity. Great book, by the way. I read that book too. C.S. Lewis.
Pretty interesting dude.
Yeah, indeed. Hey, last little thing. We might be digressing towards the close here, towards the end of our time together. I've really enjoyed it. But, you mentioned this concept. You did it earlier too. You said you want to avoid the spray and pray. And a couple of your, MacPherson-isms are, and I think this is from some Jim Rohn as well, but it's more important to reach the people who count than it is to count the number of people you're reaching. And that's a good one for wholesalers.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time, management just wants more of that binary number. Meeting count. And I agree that that's sophomoric to think that that's going to win the day. However, you mentioned this other thing that is led to by that first gear mentality, and that's what you called anticipation. And this is where high expectations, that anticipation, really just leads to disappointment. Can you talk about anticipation? Well,
anticipation, I think that was a word coined by Paul McCartney, if I'm not mistaken. But for me, it speaks to the difference between marketing and branding. So marketing is trying to convince somebody. Branding is really about working with somebody who's already convinced and helping them have the complete picture. And I think it comes down to your addressable audience. When you're crystal clear about who your addressable audience is, reaching people who count, not counting the number of people you're reaching. The caliber of upmarket, it forces you, it brings something out in you to play at that level. But it also is conducive with gaining some momentum. So, trying to convince somebody, that can lead to anticipation. Branding to create professional contrast, to differentiate and to attract that caliber of client. If you think about it, marketing is me saying to you, Mike, I'm a good coach. Branding is one of our clients saying to us, hey, you're a good coach. Super branding is getting a phone call from somebody saying, hey, you don't know me, but a good friend of mine's your client. She told me you're a good coach. That's a completely different perspective. You're not going out and finding, you're being found. There's no disappointment here. And it brings out another level of ability because of that environment.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and try to use it in my business. You mentioned narrow casting rather than broadcasting. And unless you know who you're targeting, it really is impossible. So I appreciate your work on that. You also mentioned MVP, and that, of course, stands for your most valuable prospects. Rule of 52. All of these things, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you can find on the Pareto Systems website as well as on Duncan's LinkedIn page. So whenever you pull it up, make sure you've got some popcorn and a cane sugar Coca-Cola, like I like to enjoy. One of the last things we'll talk about here is, is this law of diminishing intent? You brought it up earlier here. In fact, Duncan, did you know that that was your very first article that you put on LinkedIn?
I did not know that.
The law of diminishing intent. That goes back to the beginning, back when you were a younger man and I had 3 or 4 hair left. But I want to talk about the law of diminishing intent in regards to what we just talked about. If a wholesaler or financial advisor is out there working hard at the wrong things, broadcasting versus narrow casting, it's easy to connect the dots as to why their intent will diminish just from fatigue. Can a wholesaler avoid, especially in today's commoditizing environment, this law of diminishing intent, and what can we do to stay away from it?
Well, first of all, being aware of it is very, very powerful, and it affects all of us. I think what's really important is when you get exposed to something that you know is in your best interest, the best time to act on it is now, before it can go to your head to die. Just buying into a process, getting into that sort of trajectory with your business and expanding your thinking around, okay, it's not what it is, it's what it does. Okay, so if I just talk about what I do, I'm commoditizing myself. If I focus on what it does and the outcomes it creates, like just that, taking that action, that helps ensure that what you provide is bought, not sold. Like, I'm not trying to convince you, I'm trying to help you come to your own conclusions. This is in your best interest. This addresses an unmet need you have. You want it to be bought, not sold. Just adopting that as an intention and then bringing that to life through implementation, you're pushing the law of diminishing intent way off to the side.
One of the recent guests we had on, Patrick Bet-David, you may or may not know, he mentioned that, and I want to get your opinion on this, I'm sure you're going to echo it. He mentioned that when you make your business about money, or your goal about money, you'll slow down. There's a point of diminishing return, which is kind of where the diminishing intent kind of parallels. But there's a certain amount of money where it's just not worth the effort anymore. When you make it about mastery, you'll never slow down. I believe that is what you're talking about with this idea that financial planning is ongoing. There is no end game to it, whether it's about money or achieving a tangible goal. Would you agree with Patrick Bet-David? When you make it about mastery, it doesn't stop.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, it's like Zig Ziglar said, right? Money's not everything, but it ranks up there with oxygen, right? I mean, it's kind of important, but doesn't make us valuable. I've met some rich jerks before. Money's a means to an end. It's liberating, and so it's a great way to measure. But there's so much more. Money is a means to the end. What's the end? That's what gives life meaning. So long story short, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I'm sure that you will, and I think that we're on the same team here, and I think that the listeners are going to really appreciate how that resonates. Let's quickly talk about your continuous evolution.
Hey, so Mike, I hate to do this to you, but I gotta jump. I got a call.
You have filled my cup. It runneth over. I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll skip the signature questions. You can go back and check out his previous episode where he already answered them. And let's just do this. Duncan, hey, thanks a lot for everything you're doing. Thanks for being on the show today and for the many years of your positive and helpful tips. We all appreciate you, and I wish you much fortune and success both now and the future. Ladies and gentlemen, you can contact Duncan on LinkedIn at Duncan MacPherson or on Twitter at Duncan8020. Pretty cool. You can also see all of the Pareto Systems offered that we've mentioned today, offerings, at www.paretosystems.com, on YouTube at Pareto Systems, and on Twitter at Pareto_systems. As we say on the Awesome Wholesaler Experience podcast, it's about the journey, Duncan, and we wish you well on yours. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And if you haven't done it already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that little bell, too, by the way, so that you'll be notified each time that we release a new episode. Awesome ratings and reviews are never expected, but often and always appreciated. Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the show. And, of course, thanks for being awesome. Good night, everybody.